All right, so the second lesson for this week is going to be talking about how we can represent quadratic relations in different ways. So the first thing we need to remember is that we have these things called x-intercepts. And remember that an x-intercept is just where that parabola, this line or this curve, is going to cross my x-axis, okay? Every y value on the x-axis is going to be 0. So if I'm looking here, you could have like an x-intercept of 3, but the value of y would be 0. So this would be the point 3 and 0, okay? -6 and 0, etc. For a parabola, there are 3 different situations where we can have x-intercepts, okay? Or 3 different situations where we talk about x-intercepts. So the first one is that we have 2 x-intercepts. So it's crossing the x-axis twice because of that bowl shape. The second one is because it has 1 x-intercept. And the third one is that there's no x-intercepts because it's so far up on the graph. There are some other things that we have talked about in terms of quadratic relations. So the first one is that we know that our equations can look like the same equation but in different ways, okay? So the first way that we can see our equations is in what's called standard form. And in standard form here, you're going to have your y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, which is what we usually see. And we said that a, b, and c are just regular numbers and a can never equal 0. So this is how we normally see a quadratic equation, okay? And these are some examples of how we see this, okay? So if I had y equals -2x squared plus 4x minus 1, what this is saying here is that my a value is -2 because that's the number that's in front of the x squared. My b value is 4 because that's in front of the x, and my c value is -1, okay? In standard form, remember our c form or our c value is always our y-intercept here. So whatever number is trailing at the end and it's not attached to a letter, that's going to be the y-intercept of the graph. So if I'm looking here at y equals 5x squared minus x plus 7, what that means is that this 7, that's my y-intercept. And we could write the y-intercept as 0 and 7 because remember, if I'm crossing on the y-axis, I have no x value. Now, last week we talked about factoring, and when we factor, we break an equation that's in standard form, so in this long form like this, down into an equation that has 2 sets of brackets, okay? And that's what factored form is. And these 2 sets of brackets, these are going to give us our x-intercepts. Okay. So both the standard form and the factored form of a quadratic relation or a quadratic equation have that a value. So they're both going to have this value, that number out front. That a value actually tells us a lot of things. So just like that, if it was negative or positive in a line, if it's negative or positive here, it tells us if it's opening up or down. So for example, if that number in front of my x squared term, that a value is positive, that means that my quadratic parabola, that's going to have a smiley face. It's it has a positive attitude and is opening up, okay? If my a value, though, is negative, then that means I'm going to open down, okay? I have a negative attitude. I'm going to have a frown, okay? I'm opening down. So if I'm looking here at y equals 5x squared minus x plus 7, if I'm looking at this 5 in front of my x squared, what that means is that my 5, it's positive. So my parabola, it's going to open up. If my -3 here is out front, now that's negative, which means that my parabola opens down. Okay? So I want you guys to pause the video and I want you to look at this example here. Y equals x squared plus 2x minus 15. Okay? So if I'm looking here, does this relationship have a maximum or a minimum value? And that's going to come back up to here. So if I'm looking at my a value here and it's positive and I'm opening up, that means that I'm going to have a minimum value. I can only go up from here. Now, if I'm negative and I'm opening down, that means I have a maximum. My attitude is going down. Okay? So if I'm looking here at my example, x squared plus 2x minus 15, if I'm looking at this example here, my x squared, that's positive. Okay, so my a value, is positive. So that means I'm going to have a minimum value. Okay. My y-intercept, that's that constant that has no letter beside it. That's usually at the end of the equation, so that negative 15, that's my constant. And my zeros for this relationship, now we're going to have to factor it. Okay, so in order to factor, so zeros here, this word term zeros, remember from our lesson last week, that zeros means that we need to factor this. Okay, and so in order to factor, you're looking for those two numbers that are going to multiply to negative 15 and add to positive 2. Okay, so two numbers, so I need to list out all of my multipliers. So 1 times 15, I have 3 times 5, and I'm multiplying to a positive number, so I'm multiplying to a negative number, so either one term is negative or the other one is what I'm trying to say. And again, I know that I have to have a negative sign in there somewhere because I'm multiplying to negative 15. Okay, now I'm going to add these up and see which one is going to... So now I'm going to add the two numbers together and see if we can find one that adds to positive 2. So negative 1 plus 15, that's going to be negative 14. Negative 3 plus 5, that's 2. 1 plus negative 15 is negative 14. And 3 plus negative 5, is negative 2. That should be a negative 5. So if I'm looking here, this is my combination. These two numbers multiply. So negative 3 and positive 5 multiply to negative 15 and add to positive 2. So I'm going to make my two brackets here. Okay, I have x in each bracket, and then I'm going to put the signs in as I see them. So negative 3, positive 5. Okay. Now, this is going to be the 0. So in order to find the zeros here, there's one last step. I'm going to set each bracket equal to 0. Okay, so x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. And I'm going to solve for x now, so I need to get x by itself. So I'm going to move this negative 3 over. X is going to equal 3, and x is going to equal negative 5. So these are where my x-intercepts are. So you'll also notice that on the lesson plan for this week, there's only 2 lessons, which I think is an okay pace for us. We're on track right now for what we need to do. So I've done one example. I want you guys to try to do the second example here because there's also no homework on that unit or weekly outline, okay? So this is the question you're going to do. Again, you can pause the video, work on this question. I want you to write this equation in factored form. So you're going to factor it. I want you to find the zeros. And then what's the distance between one x value and the next x value, okay? And then I will post the answer to this to our Google Classroom. Miss you guys.